Widowed mother at 19 sells her gold necklace to feed her son. What the jeweler does. Ashley Johnson clutched the gold necklace to her chest as her 3-month-old son cried from hunger in her arms. The situation had become desperate since she lost her husband in a work accident 2 months prior, and now she had no way to feed little Ethan. That's when she decided to sell the only valuable possession she owned. The gold necklace with small golden tears dangling from it had been the last gift from her grandmother Eleanor before she passed away a year ago. It was all that remained of a family that had unraveled far too quickly. The young mother walked through the streets of downtown New York, searching for a jewelry store that would offer her a fair price for the piece. Her simple clothes contrasted with the golden shimmer of the necklace, which she carried in a worn velvet box. The first store she visited was a disaster. The merchant barely glanced at the piece and offered a paltry sum, claiming the gold wasn't pure. Ashley knew he was lying. Her grandmother had always told her how special that necklace was, crafted by a famous jeweler decades ago. With a heavy heart and Ethan growing more restless, she kept searching. That's when she spotted the elegant facade of Hope Jewelry in the heart of the city. The name caught her attention because it was exactly what she needed at that moment. Upon entering the store, Ashley felt intimidated by its sophistication. Lit display cases showcased expensive jewels, and the marble floor reflected the light from crystal chandeliers. She held Ethan close to her chest, trying to calm both him and herself. A young man in an impeccable suit approached with a look of disdain. It was Richard Hope, the store manager and son of the owner. His eyes swept over Ashley's modest appearance with clear disapproval. Mr. Thomas Hope, a distinguished man in his 60s with neatly combed grey hair, observed the scene from afar. There was something about the desperate posture of that young mother that deeply moved him. He stepped forward before his son could dismiss the customer. "How may I help you, miss?" Thomas asked kindly, ignoring Richard's disapproving glance. Ashley took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. Ethan whimpered softly in her arms, and she swayed gently in a desperate attempt to soothe him. "I need to sell this necklace," she said, extending the small velvet box with trembling hands. "It's all I have of value, and my son, he needs milk." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Thomas carefully took the box and opened it delicately. His eyes widened at the sight of the gold necklace with small golden tears dangling from it. His breath caught in his throat for a moment, and a wave of old memories hit him like a punch to the gut. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice thick with an emotion he tried to conceal. "It belonged to my grandmother Eleanor," Ashley replied, uneasy about his reaction. "She left it to me when she passed last year. Why? Is something wrong with it?" Thomas examined the necklace more closely, searching for something specific. When he found a tiny clasp hidden behind the central pendant, his hands began to tremble. Gently, he opened the secret compartment and revealed a small engraved inscription. "To Eleanor, my eternal love. Th. 1985. The world seemed to stop around Thomas. Richard approached curiously, but was ignored by his father, who remained fixated on the inscription. Ashley watched in confusion, unsure of what was happening. "Your grandmother, what was her full name?" Thomas asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Eleanor Johnson. She worked as a seamstress, but before that she had other jobs. Why are you so shaken up?" Thomas closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 4 decades of regret. Eleanor Johnson. The name echoed in his mind like a forgotten prayer. How had he not recognized her immediately? The young woman before him had the same expressive brown eyes, the same delicate curve of her lips. "I need you to sit down," he said, pointing to a leather armchair in the corner of the store. "We have a lot to talk about." Ashley hesitated, but the seriousness in the jeweler's tone convinced her. She settled into the chair, adjusting Ethan, who had finally stopped crying as if sensing the shift in the air. Thomas pulled up a chair and sat across from her, still holding the necklace. Richard remained standing nearby, growing more intrigued by his father's strange behavior. "This necklace," Thomas began, choosing his words carefully, "I made it for a very special woman almost 40 years ago. It was an engagement gift." Ashley's eyes widened. Engagement? But my grandmother never married. She raised my mother alone and never spoke about any special man in her life. Because our story had an ending I didn't understand for decades, Thomas said, his voice heavy with pain. Eleanor worked in my parents' house as a housekeeper. I was finishing jewelry design school, and we fell deeply in love. Thomas paused, lost in memories. Richard stepped closer, having never heard this story before. We were from different worlds, but that didn't matter to us. I had decided to stand up to my family and marry her. I designed this necklace especially for Eleanor. Every detail represented a moment we shared. Ashley listened in silence, trying to process the information. Her grandmother had always been private about her past, changing the subject whenever relationships came up. We set the wedding for December 1985. I was so happy. I'd even bought the rings, Thomas continued, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. But 3 weeks before the ceremony, I got a letter from her ending everything. A letter? Ashley asked, confused. She said she'd realized our love was an illusion, that I deserved someone of my social standing, and that she was leaving town to start a new life. I never saw her again after that. Silence filled the room. Richard watched his father with shock, never imagining such an important chapter of his life had been kept hidden. But if you made the necklace for her, how did she still have it? Ashley asked, trying to piece things together. I gave her the necklace 2 weeks before the letter arrived. Eleanor accepted it with tears of joy. She said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever received, Thomas said with a sad smile. Now I understand why she didn't return it with the letter. Maybe it still meant something to her. Ashley stood abruptly, jostling Ethan, who had fallen asleep. That doesn't make sense. My grandmother wasn't the type to run from problems. She always talked about the importance of honesty. I thought the same thing for years, Thomas admitted. Eleanor was the most sincere person I knew. But what else could have happened? The letter was handwritten, it was her writing. Richard, who had stayed quiet, finally spoke. Dad, do you still have that letter? Of course I do. I kept everything that reminded me of her, even after marrying your mother. Ashley felt a pang in her chest. You married after that? Yes, 2 years later. I met Margaret at a family gathering, and she was very patient with me as I tried to forget Eleanor. We had Richard and built a good life together. Where's Mom now? Richard asked, visiting her sister in Miami Beach. Come back next week, replied Thomas, then turned his attention to Ashley. But tell me about your family. Is your mother still alive? Ashley's face grew sad. She passed away 2 years ago. She had a lung disease and we couldn't afford proper treatment. It's just me and Ethan now. Thomas felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. A wave of guilt washed over him as he thought of all the hardships Eleanor and her daughter must have endured while he built a comfortable life. What was your mother's name? He asked, a growing suspicion tightening his chest. Melissa Johnson. She worked as a cleaning lady in several places to support me. She always said my grandmother taught her that honest work, no matter what kind, has its dignity. Thomas closed his eyes, doing the math in his head. If Eleanor left in 1985 and Ashley's mother was named Melissa, when he opened his eyes again, he stared at Ashley with an intensity that startled her. How old was your mother when she passed? 37. Why? The calculation lined up perfectly. If Melissa died 2 years ago at 37, she was born in 1986, exactly 9 months after Eleanor left. Thomas stood abruptly, walking to his desk at the back of the store. He returned carrying an old folder full of documents and photographs. With trembling hands, he sifted through the papers until he found what he was looking for. Look at this photo, he said, handing Ashley a faded picture. The image showed a much younger Thomas, embracing a beautiful woman with brown hair and expressive eyes. Ashley gasped, immediately recognizing her grandmother, just decades younger. It's Grandma Eleanor, she whispered, gently touching the photo. She looked so beautiful and happy here. This was taken a week before she left, Thomas said, sitting back down. See how radiant she was. Doesn't look like someone about to walk away from the love of her life, does it? Ashley studied the photo more closely. Her grandmother did look utterly in love and happy, Nothing in her expression suggested she was about to end a relationship. "Is there anything else in this folder I should see?" she asked. Thomas hesitated, then pulled out a yellowed envelope. "This is the letter I received. To this day I couldn't bring myself to throw it away." Carefully, he opened the envelope and unfolded a sheet of paper. Ashley read it silently, her brows furrowing in confusion. "Mr. Thomas, can I ask a strange question?" "Of course. Are you sure this is my grandmother's handwriting?" The question caught Thomas off guard. "I am. Why do you ask?" Ashley opened her purse and pulled out a worn little notebook. This was Grandma Eleanor's recipe journal. She wrote all our family recipes here, and I know her handwriting perfectly. She opened the notebook and placed it beside the letter. The difference in handwriting was subtle but noticeable to someone familiar with Eleanor's writing. "The letters are similar, but not identical," Ashley pointed out. "Look at how she wrote the G in the foy. In the letter, they're different." Thomas picked up the magnifying glass he used to examine jewelry and studied both texts carefully. Richard stepped closer to see better. After a few minutes of scrutiny, Thomas looked up, pale. "You're right, this letter wasn't written by Eleanor." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Richard was the first to break it. "Dad, if she didn't write the letter, who did? And why?" Before Thomas could answer, the store's doorbell chimed. All three turned to see an elegant woman in her mid-50s entering the shop. It was Margaret Hope, who had returned early from her trip. "Thomas, darling, I came straight from the airport to—" she began but stopped abruptly at the scene before her. Her gaze shifted from the photo on the table to the necklace in her husband's hands, and her expression changed completely. "Margaret, I thought you weren't coming back until next week," said Thomas, quickly putting the photo away. Margaret approached slowly, her eyes fixed on the necklace. "Where did this piece come from?" she asked, her voice tense. "It belongs to the young lady here," replied Thomas, gesturing to Ashley. "She came to sell it and we discovered it belonged to her grandmother." "And what was her grandmother's name?" Margaret asked, but something in her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Eleanor Johnson," Ashley replied, watching the woman's strange reaction. Margaret visibly paled. She moved toward a chair and sat down heavily, as if her legs could no longer support her. "Mom, are you okay?" asked Richard, concerned. "Eleanor Johnson," Margaret repeated, more to herself than to the others. "After all these years, Eleanor Johnson comes back to haunt my life." Thomas stared at her with growing suspicion. "What do you mean, haunt your life? Did you know Eleanor?" Margaret took a deep breath, as if making a difficult decision. "I knew her very well. In fact, I was the one who wrote that letter. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing." The world seemed to stop. Thomas slowly stood, his face twisted in a mix of shock and anger. Richard looked at his mother, as if seeing her for the first time. Ashley held Ethan close to her chest, sensing the tension in the air. "What did you say?" Thomas asked, his voice dangerously low. "I wrote the letter, Thomas, and I'd do it again if I had to," Margaret said, lifting her chin in defiance. "But why?" Thomas stepped closer to his wife, disbelieving. "Why would you do such a thing?" Margaret stood and began pacing like a caged animal. "Because I'd been in love with you for years. I watched you grow up, cheered for you in college, and then this housekeeper comes along and steals everything I dreamed of having." "You had no right to do that," Thomas exploded. "It was my life, my choice." "Your choice was ruining your life," Margaret shouted back. "You were the heir of a respected family, destined for great things. Eleanor Johnson could never give you the future you deserved." Ashley watched the argument in silence, trying to process the magnitude of the revelation. Richard was visibly shaken, leaning against a display case as if he needed support. "How did you even do it?" Thomas asked, his voice now more controlled but filled with pain. Margaret hesitated before answering. "I worked at the bank where Eleanor had opened a savings account. Small, but she was saving money for your wedding. I got access to her address and paid her a visit." "You went to her?" Thomas was incredulous. "I did. I told her I was your cousin and that the family was furious about the engagement. I said your parents threatened to disinherit you and ruin your life if the marriage happened. Ashley finally spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. And my grandmother believed you. Eleanor was a simple, kind woman. When I told her that her love was destroying the future of the man she loved, she was devastated, Margaret continued, now sounding less confident. I offered a solution. I said if she left the city and pretended she no longer loved him, your family would forgive you, and you could follow your destiny. So you forged the letter, Thomas concluded, understanding the full extent of the betrayal. I practiced her handwriting for weeks. I studied every document that passed through my hands at the bank. When I finally wrote the letter, even I believed it was convincing. Richard finally found his voice. Mum, you destroyed 3 people's lives with this lie. 4 people, corrected Ashley, looking at Ethan in her arms. Because if my grandmother hadn't run away, my mother wouldn't have grown up without a father. I wouldn't have lost my husband so young, and Ethan would have a complete family. The realization of what Ashley had said hit Thomas like lightning. He looked at the young mother with growing horror. Ashley, how old was your mother when you were born? 18. Why? Thomas closed his eyes, doing the math. Melissa was born in 1986, 9 months after Eleanor left. Ashley was born in 2005 when Melissa was 18. That meant Ashley was, "You're 19 years old," he said, more as a statement than a question. Yes, sir. The final revelation was clear to everyone in the room. Not only had Eleanor carried Thomas's daughter in secret, but his granddaughter was now standing before him, holding his great-grandson, whose existence he hadn't even known about. Margaret watched the situation unfold with growing desperation. Thomas, you have to understand, I did it out of love. You did it out of selfishness, he exploded. Because of your lies, I lost my daughter, my granddaughter, and almost lost my great-grandson. Eleanor died without me ever getting to ask for forgiveness. Melissa grew up without a father. Ashley is struggling to provide for my great-grandson. Ashley stood up, rocking Ethan, who had started crying again from the raised voices. Please stop shouting, you're scaring the baby. The simplicity of the request brought a moment of silence. Thomas looked at Ashley and saw Eleanor in her eyes, the same kindness and inner strength that had won him over decades ago. Ashley, I need you to know something, he said, his voice gentle now. If all of this is true, if Melissa really was my daughter, then you are my granddaughter and Ethan is my great-grandson. I know, she replied calmly. I've already figured that out. But the question is, what do we do now? Richard, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Dad, we need DNA tests. We can't make such important decisions based on assumptions. No, Ashley said firmly. I won't take any test. Everyone looked at her in surprise. Why? Thomas asked. Because I don't need a piece of paper to tell me who I am. I grew up hearing my grandmother talk about dignity and working for what you have. I came here to sell a necklace and buy milk for my son. That's what I'm going to do. She turned toward the door, but Thomas followed her. Ashley, wait. You can't just leave now. I can and I will. This family has already caused enough pain to mine. I don't want any part of it. Margaret stepped forward timidly. Ashley, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but you're right, you don't, Ashley cut in, turning to face her. Because of your lies, my grandmother died believing she wasn't good enough for the man she loved. My mother grew up without a father and worked herself to death trying to give me a better life. And now I'm here, desperate to feed my son. Ashley's words stabbed at Margaret's heart. The woman began to cry, finally understanding the magnitude of what she had done. Please, Thomas begged, at least let me help with Ethan. He's innocent in all this. Like you said yourself, you lost the right to help when you didn't fight for my grandmother's love, Ashley replied. Now please, how much will you pay me for the necklace? Thomas looked at the piece in his hands. It was so much more than just jewelry now. It was the only physical connection left to Eleanor, a symbol of a love destroyed by lies and pride. This necklace is priceless, he said. I was made with love, carried with tears, and represents everything I lost. So you won't buy it? Asked Ashley, her voice breaking. I'll pay for whatever you need to feed Ethan for a whole month. But the necklace, can I keep it just for a few hours? I promise to return it. Ashley hesitated. Ethan had stopped crying and was watching her with his big dark eyes, as if he understood the importance of the moment. Why do you want to keep it? To better understand your grandmother's story. There might be other clues, other hidden secrets that help us figure out what really happened. Against her better judgment, Ashley agreed. Thomas gave her enough money to buy not just milk, but diapers and medicine for Ethan. He also insisted on writing down her address. Come back tomorrow afternoon, he said. I promise I'll have more answers for you. After Ashley left, a heavy silence settled over Hope Jewelry. Richard looked at his mother with disappointment, while Thomas examined the necklace under his professional magnifying glass. Dad, what are you looking for? Asked Richard. Eleanor was a smart woman. If she kept this necklace all these years, there must have been a reason beyond sentimentality. Thomas inspected every detail of the piece with meticulous care. When he reached the small teardrop-shaped pendants, he noticed one looked slightly different from the others. With delicate tools, he managed to open the pendant. Inside was a small, yellowed piece of paper, rolled up with age. With trembling hands, Thomas unrolled it and found a message written in Eleanor's unmistakable handwriting. My love, if you're reading this, it means our son found his way back to you. I never stopped loving you, but I believed my leaving was necessary for your sake. Forgive me for not trusting in our love. Eleanor, 1986. Tears streamed down Thomas's face. Eleanor had hidden the truth in the very necklace he had created to symbolize their love. She had known that one day, somehow, this message would reach him. Richard read the message over his father's shoulder. She was pregnant when she left and you didn't know. And she didn't know I never wrote that cruel letter she received, murmured Thomas, looking at Margaret with a mix of anger and sorrow. Margaret stepped forward hesitantly. Thomas, No, he interrupted. There are no words that can fix this. You destroyed 4 lives with your lie. Eleanor died thinking I rejected her. Melissa grew up without a father. Ashley is struggling alone. And Ethan, my great-grandson, almost starved because I didn't know he existed. What will you do now? Asked Richard. Thomas carefully tucked away Eleanor's message. I'll find a way to make this right, starting by making sure Ashley and Ethan never go without again. What about me? Asked Margaret, her voice small. As for you, we'll talk when I've processed all this. For now, I suggest you think long and hard about what you've done and prepare to face the consequences. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He paced the house looking at old photographs and remembering Eleanor. How foolish he'd been to accept that letter without question. He knew Eleanor better than anyone. He should have realized something was wrong. The next morning, he was at the jewelry store before it even opened. Richard arrived to find his father surrounded by papers, scribbling notes frantically. What are you doing, Dad? Researching Eleanor and Melissa. I want to know everything about their lives, every hardship they faced. I need to understand the full extent of the damage done. Richard sat beside his father. And then? What's the plan? First, I'll acknowledge Ashley as my granddaughter, whether she wants it or not. Ethan is my great-grandson, and he deserves every right that comes with it. Second, I'll make sure Ashley finishes her education and has a respectable profession. Third, I'll set up a fund for Ethan to secure his education and future. And what about Margaret? Thomas paused in his notes. Your mother and I will have a very serious conversation about our marriage. I don't know if I'll be able to forgive her for this. That afternoon, as promised, Ashley returned to Hope Jewelry. She found Thomas alone, since Richard had stepped out to handle some business and Margaret hadn't shown up. I brought the money back, she said, holding out the envelope. I don't feel right keeping it. I won't take it back, Thomas said firmly. And I have something to show you. He handed her the necklace and the small note he had found. Ashley read it with tears in her eyes. She knew, she whispered. Grandma Eleanor knew this would reach you one day. And she was right. Ashley, I need you to understand something. I'm not trying to buy your forgiveness or force a family relationship, but I have a moral responsibility to take care of you and Ethan. You don't owe me anything, Ashley said. Yes, I do. I owe Eleanor, who died thinking I had rejected her. I owe Melissa, who grew up without a father because of a lie. And I owe you, who's raising my great-grandson practically alone." Ashley stayed silent for a long moment, gently swaying Ethan as he played with her fingers. "What exactly are you proposing?" "First, I want you to go back to school. I'll cover all the costs and take care of Ethan while you're in college. Second, I want to teach you everything about the jewelry business. Eleanor always had good taste. I'm sure you inherited that. Third, I want Ethan to know his family's story, the real one. What if I say no? Then I'll respect your decision, but I'll still send money every month to make sure Ethan has what he needs. He's my blood, and I won't abandon him like I unintentionally abandoned Melissa." Ashley stood and walked to the display case, looking at the jewelry. Ethan was mesmerized by the sparkles and colors. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Do you still love my grandmother?" The question caught Thomas off guard. He thought for a moment before answering. "I never stopped loving Eleanor. I married Margaret because she was patient with me and because I thought it was time to move on. But Eleanor was always the love of my life. And now that you know the truth, now I know she never stopped loving me either. And that gives me peace even though it's too late." Ashley turned to face him. "I accept your offer, but on one condition." "What is it?" "I want to learn everything about the business, not just to work here, but to open my own store one day. I want to build something for myself, something I can leave for Ethan." Thomas smiled for the first time in days. "Eleanor would be proud of you." In the months that followed, Ashley began visiting the jewelry store regularly. Thomas had hired a nanny to care for Ethan while she attended a nearby jewelry design school. The young woman showed impressive natural talent, creating delicate and meaningful pieces. Richard, initially resistant to the situation, ended up charmed by his niece and great-nephew. He helped Ashley with business lessons and often played with Ethan, who had become the family's darling. Margaret had moved into her own apartment after a difficult conversation with Thomas. Though he hadn't filed for divorce immediately, he made it clear he needed time to decide if he could forgive her. She accepted the distance as the consequence of her actions. One day, 6 months after the revelation, Ashley was working on a new piece when Thomas approached. "What are you working on?" "It's a surprise," she said, covering the design with a cloth. "But I can tell you, it's inspired by Grandma Eleanor's story." "I have a proposal for you," said Thomas. "How about we turn part of the store into your own workshop for your creations? You could sign your pieces and start building your own reputation." Ashley's eyes lit up. "You'd do that for me?" "Eleanor always dreamed of having something of her own. Through you, maybe that dream can come true." That night, Ashley worked late finishing her secret project. It was a necklace similar to the one her grandmother had kept, but with a more modern design. Instead of golden tears, it had small hearts connected by a delicate chain. The next day, she presented the piece to Thomas. "This is for you," she said, handing him a velvet box, "to remind you that true love always finds its way back." Thomas opened the box and was moved by what he saw. When he found the hidden clasp and opened it, he discovered a small photo. Him, Eleanor, Melissa, which Ashley had found among her grandmother's belongings, Ashley herself and Ethan, all together in a montage symbolizing the family they should have been. "Thank you," he said, his voice choked. "It's perfect. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now, continuing. 2 years had passed. Ashley had graduated, and her exclusive jewelry line was a success. Ethan, now a curious 2-year-old, ran around the store as if it were his home, charming customers with his cheerful personality. Hope Jewelry had transformed. Half the space was dedicated to Thomas's traditional designs, and the other half to Ashley's modern workshop. The combination of the two styles attracted a diverse clientele, and the business thrived. Richard had taken over the administrative side of the company, revealing a surprising talent for management. He and Ashley worked like true siblings, complementing each other's skills. Margaret had started therapy to work through her issues and was slowly rebuilding relationships with the family. Thomas still hadn't made a decision about their marriage, but allowed her to visit Ethan regularly. One Thursday afternoon, an elderly woman entered the store. She appeared to be in her 70s, with neatly styled white hair and kind eyes. Ashley greeted her with her usual warm smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "I'm looking for Thomas Hope," the woman said. "I'm Teresa Oliver, Eleanor Johnson's best friend." Ashley dropped the piece she was holding. "You knew my grandmother?" "I did, and I loved Eleanor like a sister," Teresa replied, her eyes shining. "When I heard her granddaughter had found Thomas, I had to come meet you." Thomas appeared upon hearing the conversation. When he saw Teresa, his face lit up. "Mrs. Teresa, after all these years..." "Thomas, my dear, you look the same, just a few more grey hairs." They embraced emotionally. Ashley watched curiously, holding Ethan, who had run over to see the newcomer. "Mrs. Teresa, this is Ashley, Eleanor's granddaughter, and this is Ethan, my great-grandson." Teresa studied Ashley affectionately. "You look just like Eleanor when she was young. And this little prince must be the joy of the family." "Could you tell us more about my grandmother?" Ashley asked eagerly, hungry for more details about Eleanor's life. "I can and I will. But first, Thomas, I need to tell you something Eleanor asked me to keep secret until you two were reunited." They all settled into a private area of the store. Teresa took a deep breath before speaking. "Eleanor never truly believed that letter she received. She knew you would never write something so cruel to her." "Then why did she leave?" asked Thomas. "Because she was pregnant and scared. When that woman showed up at her house claiming to be her cousin and threatening to ruin her life, Eleanor panicked. Not because of the letter, but because of the threats about what her family would do to you." Teresa paused, choosing her words carefully. "Margaret told Eleanor that if she didn't leave, her family would destroy her career and make sure you never worked as a jeweler anywhere. Eleanor believed she was protecting you by leaving." "My God," murmured Thomas. "She sacrificed our happiness to protect my future." "Exactly. And when she found out she was pregnant, she decided she couldn't turn back. She believed it would be selfish of her to ruin your life just because she was carrying your child." Ashley wiped the tears streaming down her face. "Grandma Eleanor was always like that, always put others before herself. She made me promise that if you two ever found each other again, I would tell the truth," Teresa continued. "Eleanor never stopped loving you, Thomas. Until her last days, she spoke of you with such tenderness." "Did she know I got married?" asked Thomas. "She did. And she was happy you had built a family. She said at least one of Margaret's lies had come true. You really had moved on and found a good life." "But I didn't," admitted Thomas. "I lived an incomplete life, always feeling like something was missing. Now I know it was Eleanor, Melissa, Ashley, and Ethan." Teresa smiled sadly. "Eleanor always knew the truth would come out one day. That's why she left clues in the necklace and taught Melissa about you, even without telling the whole story." "Did my mom know about Thomas?" asked Ashley, surprised. "She knew her father was a good, honest jeweler who had been deceived. Eleanor told Melissa that one day when she was ready, she should look for you. Unfortunately, Melissa passed before she got the chance." "And she passed that on to me?" Ashley asked. "In a way, yes. Melissa always said you had a special gift, that your hands were meant to create beauty. Now I understand she was preparing you to find your way back to your family." Ethan, who had been quietly sitting in Ashley's lap, suddenly reached his little arms out to Teresa. The older woman took him gently. "And you, little one, are proof that love always wins. 4 generations later, here we all are together, as it should have been from the start." Thomas stood and walked to his desk, returning with a folder of documents. "Mrs. Teresa, I want you to witness something important." He opened the folder and pulled out several official papers. "Today, I finalized the legal recognition of Ashley as my granddaughter and Ethan as my great-grandson. I've also transferred 50% of the shares in Hope Jewelry to Ashley, making her my official partner." Ashley quickly stood. "Mr. Thomas, I can't accept this. It's not about accepting, it's your birthright. Eleanor should have been my wife, Melissa my daughter, and you my granddaughter, raised here with me. I'm just correcting a historic wrong." "But what about Richard?" Ashley asked, concerned. Richard fully agreed. In fact, it was his idea. He said he'd rather work with his sister than alone. Teresa watched the scene with joyful tears. Eleanor would be so proud to see this, her family finally together. That evening they held a special dinner to celebrate. Richard arrived with a surprise. He had commissioned a portrait from old photos showing Eleanor, Melissa, Thomas, Ashley and Ethan together as a family. "For the jewelry store's wall," he said. "So everyone knows the real story of Hope Jewelry." 3 months later, Margaret asked to speak with Thomas in private. They met at a cafe near the store, neutral ground for a conversation they both knew was necessary. "I want to ask for a divorce," she said, getting straight to the point. Thomas studied her for a moment. "May I ask why?" "Because I finally understand you were never really mine. I stole decades of your life, and you deserve the chance to be happy, even if it's late. And you? What's your plan?" "I'm moving to another state, starting a new life. Maybe one day I'll forgive myself for what I did." "Margaret," Thomas said gently, "what you did was terrible. But you also gave me Richard. And for that, I'll always be grateful. He can visit me whenever he wants, but I understand my place isn't here anymore." They said goodbye civilly. Margaret had found some peace in accepting the consequences of her past actions. A year later, Hope Jewelry had become the most famous in the area. Ashley's creations, inspired by stories of love and family, drew customers from all over the state. Ethan, now 3 years old, was already showing interest in the shiny pieces and helped his grandfather by organizing tools. One Saturday morning, Ashley was working on a special piece when Thomas approached. "What is it this time?" "A very special order," she said with a mysterious smile. "May I ask for whom?" "For you, though you don't know it yet," Thomas laughed. "I'm intrigued." Ashley revealed the piece she was working on, a simple yet elegant men's necklace with a special pendant, a tiny replica of the store, complete with miniature details of the display windows. "It's for Father's Day," she explained, "for the best grandfather Ethan could ever have." Thomas was moved. "Ashley, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did. You gave me back my family, my history, my future. That's the least I can do." Just then, Ethan ran up to them, holding a drawing he'd made. "Grandpa, look!" he shouted, holding out the paper. The drawing showed stick figures representing the whole family: Thomas, Ashley, Ethan, Richard, and even Eleanor and Melissa as angels in the sky. In the center was a house that clearly represented the jewelry store. "It's our family," Ethan explained, with the seriousness of a 3-year-old. Thomas knelt beside his great-grandson. "It's perfect, Ethan. Let's frame it and hang it in the store." As he watched Ethan explain every detail of the drawing, Thomas reflected on how life had a strange way of correcting itself. He had lost Eleanor but gained Ashley. He had lost Melissa but gained Ethan. And through this new family, he was finally finding the peace he'd searched for decades. That afternoon, after the store closed, they went upstairs to the apartment Thomas had renovated for Ashley and Ethan. It was small but cozy, decorated with family photos and some of Ashley's earliest creations. While Ethan played with his toys, Ashley and Thomas sat on the small balcony overlooking the busy street. "You know something?" Ashley said. "Sometimes I wonder how different things would be if Grandma Eleanor hadn't kept that necklace." "We probably never would have met," Thomas admitted. "Eleanor knew what she was doing when she left clues in it. Do you think she imagined this would happen?" "I'm sure she did. Eleanor was always the most hopeful person I knew. Even in the worst situations, she believed things would work out in the end." "It's a trait I hope I've inherited," Ashley said, smiling. "You definitely have, and Ethan will too." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the street below. Ethan appeared on the balcony, carrying a storybook. "Grandpa, tell me a story." "Which story do you want to hear?" "Our story," Ethan said, settling into his grandfather's lap. Thomas smiled and began to tell the story of Eleanor and the magical necklace that reunited a family separated by time and lies. Ethan listened intently, asking questions and making comments that showed he already understood the importance of family history. When the story ended, Ethan asked a question that surprised both adults. "Grandpa, are you sad because Grandma Eleanor isn't here?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes I am sad, Ethan. But I'm also happy because she left us you and your mom, and I'm sure she's very proud of both of you." Can she see us from heaven? I'm certain she can. And I bet she's smiling, seeing how special you both are. Ethan seemed satisfied with the answer and asked to play a little longer before bed. As he ran around the porch, Ashley approached Thomas. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For welcoming us, for teaching me about the business, for giving Ethan a family, for everything. I'm the one who should be thanking you. You gave me a purpose I didn't know was missing." That night after Ethan fell asleep, Ashley stayed awake thinking about the future. She had ambitious plans to expand her jewelry line, maybe even open a second store in a nearby town, but she knew she'd always return home to Hope Jewelry, where her true story had begun. Downstairs, Thomas was also awake, organizing papers in his office. He had decided to write a book about the family's history, so Ethan would grow up knowing every detail of his heritage. It was his way of honoring Eleanor and ensuring her memory would never fade. 5 years passed. Ethan was now 8 and attended a nearby private school. After class, he always rushed to the store to help his mother and grandfather. Richard had married and was expecting his first child, ensuring the family line would continue. Hope Jewelry had become a respected small family business. Ashley had opened her second store and was planning a third. Her creations were sought after across the country, and she had built a reputation for crafting pieces that told stories. One October afternoon, a young woman in her 20s entered the original store carrying an old box. She looked nervous and hesitant. "Excuse me for bothering you," she said to Ashley, "but I'm looking for information about this piece." She opened the box, revealing a pair of gold earrings with a design similar to Eleanor's necklace. Ashley examined them with interest. "They're beautiful. Where did you get them?" "They belong to my great-grandmother. She passed away recently and left them to me, along with this letter." The young woman handed over a yellowed envelope. Ashley quickly read it, and her eyes widened. "Mr. Thomas," she called, "you need to see this." Thomas appeared and read the letter. It was from an old customer of his decades ago, asking that if any family member ever came to the jewelry store, he would tell them the story of the earrings. "Your name is?" Thomas asked. "Sophia Miller. My great-grandmother was Carmen Miller." "Mrs. Carmen," Thomas exclaimed. "She was one of my first customers. These earrings were a wedding gift her husband commissioned in 1982. Sophia smiled. "She always said you made special jewelry, that every piece had a soul." "And it did," Ashley said. "Every piece we make here carries a story, a feeling." "Actually," Sophia said hesitantly, "I didn't just come here to learn about the earrings. I came because I'm graduating from design school and heard about your work. I was wondering if you'd take on an intern." Ashley and Thomas exchanged glances. The circle was closing once again. A new generation had come to Hope Jewelry to learn the craft and carry on the traditions. "When can you start?" asked Ashley. 3 months later, Sophia had become an integral part of the team. Her youthful energy and fresh ideas perfectly complemented Thomas's experience and Ashley's creativity. Ethan loved having someone younger around and often helped Sophia with small tasks. During a coffee break, Sophia made an observation that made everyone laugh. "Have you noticed this store is like a magnet for family stories? Since I started working here, 3 people have come looking for information about old jewelry they bought here decades ago." "It's true," agreed Richard, who had stopped by for a visit. "Dad always said a good piece of jewelry carries the energy of its owner. And when that energy is positive, it attracts more positivity," added Ashley. Ethan, who was fiddling with some old tools at a nearby table, looked up. "Is that why our store is special? Because it has lots of good energy?" "Exactly, Ethan," said Thomas, ruffling the boy's hair. "And that energy comes from the love we put into every piece we make." "When I grow up, I'm going to make jewelry too," Ethan declared with conviction. "Only if that's what truly makes you happy," said Ashley. "You can be anything you want." "But I want to work here with you," Ethan insisted. "This is where our family is together." That night, after everyone had left, Thomas stayed alone in the store organizing some new pieces that had arrived. At 72, he still took pleasure in working with his hands, creating beauty from metal and stones. As he worked, his thoughts turned to Eleanor. 20 years after her passing, he had finally made peace with the past. He knew she would be proud of the family they had built, even if unconventionally. The doorbell chimed, interrupting his thoughts. He looked up and saw Ashley walking in with Ethan, who was wearing his pajamas under a coat. "We forgot his teddy bear here," Ashley explained. "He can't sleep without it." Ethan ran to grab his stuffed bear, which had been left on a chair. Meanwhile, Ashley approached Thomas. "Working late again?" "Just reflecting," he said. "Thinking about how life has its own ways of correcting itself." "Do you regret anything?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "I regret not fighting harder for Eleanor back then, but I don't regret the path that brought us here, because it gave us you and Ethan." Ethan reappeared with his bear and walked up to his grandfather. "Grandpa, are you staying here all night?" "No, little one. I'm heading home too." "Can I help you put things away?" Thomas smiled. "Of course you can." Together, the three of them tidied up the store for the next day. Ethan took his task very seriously, checking that all the lights were off and the doors were locked. It was clear he already felt responsible for the family business. As they walked home under the streetlights, Ethan holding Ashley's and Thomas's hands, the old jeweler felt a sense of wholeness he hadn't known in decades. His family was together, his business thrived, and the future looked bright. "Mom," Ethan said suddenly, "do you think Grandma Eleanor can see us now?" "I'm sure she can," Ashley replied, "and I think she's very happy seeing how close we are." "I wish I could have met her," Ethan said thoughtfully. "You have," Thomas said. "Every time your mum makes a beautiful piece of jewelry, every time you help someone in the store, every time you show kindness, you're showing the legacy Eleanor left for our family." Ethan seemed satisfied with the answer. When they got home, he hugged his grandfather tightly before saying goodnight. "I love you, Grandpa. I love you too, Ethan. You're the best gift Eleanor could have given me." That night, as Ashley put Ethan to bed, the boy asked one of his deep questions. "Mom, if Grandma Eleanor hadn't kept the necklace, would I have never met Grandpa?" "Probably not, sweetheart." "Then she was really smart, huh? Very smart and very loving. She knew our family would find each other again one day. And now we're all together forever." "Forever and always," Ashley confirmed, kissing her son's forehead. 10 years later, Ethan was 18 and had just graduated from high school. True to his childhood promise, he wanted to work at the family jewelry store. But first, Thomas and Ashley insisted he attend business school to prepare for the modern challenges of the industry. Hope Jewelry had grown into a small, successful company with 5 stores across the state. Ashley had become a nationally recognized designer, and her pieces were sold in luxury stores in several cities. Thomas, now 82, had officially retired, but still spent every day at the original store, telling stories to customers and mentoring younger employees. His memory remained sharp, and he loved reminiscing about the history of every vintage piece that came in for repairs or appraisals. Richard had taken over the administrative side of the business and had 2 young children who, like Ethan in his childhood, loved playing in the store after school. Sophia had become a minority partner and managed the newest store, specializing in bridal jewelry. One Monday morning, Ethan walked into the original store carrying a folder of documents. "Grandpa, Mom, I have a proposal for you," he said with a mysterious smile. "We're listening," Ashley said, curious. "I want to start a social project. Use part of the company's profits to teach goldsmithing to underprivileged youth. We can give them a trade and a chance to change their lives." Thomas and Ashley exchanged proud glances. Ethan had grown up with the values of generosity that Eleanor had always championed. "Tell us more about this idea," Thomas requested. Ethan opened the folder and showed them a detailed plan he had developed during his last months in college. "And we can use the upstairs space in the new store to set up a small workshop school. We'll teach basic techniques, jewelry history, and customer service. The best students can intern here with us." "And how would we choose the participants?" Ashley asked. "Partnerships with public schools and community centers, kids from low-income families who show interest and skill for hands-on work." Thomas stood and walked over to the family photo Richard had commissioned years ago. Eleanor, though physically absent, seemed to approve of the project with her eternal smile in the picture. "Eleanor always dreamed of helping people find dignified work," he said. "I think she would have loved this project." "So you approve?" Ethan asked eagerly. More than approve, Ashley said. We're proud to see you've inherited not just the family's business talent, but also its generous heart. 6 months later, the Eleanor Project was in full swing. 20 young people, ages 16 to 20, attended classes 3 times a week. Thomas became the teacher of history and traditions, while Ashley taught modern design, and Ethan focused on basic goldsmithing techniques. The results exceeded all expectations. Some students showed exceptional talent and had already been hired by other jewelry stores in the area. Others decided to continue their studies in design or start small businesses of their own. During the graduation ceremony of the first class, Thomas was invited to give a speech. With an emotional voice, he told the story of Eleanor and how the necklace kept for decades had reunited a family and changed many lives. The true value of a piece of jewelry isn't in the gold or the precious stones, he said to the audience. It's in the hands that create it, the love poured into every detail and the stories it carries. You are now the bearers of this tradition. One of the graduating students, a young woman named Beatrice who physically resembled Eleanor, approached him after the ceremony. Mr. Thomas, I want to thank you for this opportunity. My family never imagined I could have such a beautiful profession. The talent was always in you, my dear. We just helped you develop it. May I ask you a personal question? Of course. Do you think Eleanor would be proud of what you've built? Thomas looked around the hall decorated with photos of the students' creations, saw Ashley chatting animatedly with other graduates, Ethan explaining techniques to curious parents, and Richard organizing the tables displaying the jewelry. I'm absolutely certain she would, he replied. Eleanor always believed that love multiplied returns twofold. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. That evening, the family gathered at Thomas's home for a celebratory dinner. As everyone chatted excitedly about the day's successes, Ethan approached his grandfather. Grandpa, can I show you something? Of course, Ethan. The young man pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small emerald at its center. I made it for my girlfriend. We're getting married at the end of the year. Thomas examined the piece with an expert's eye. The craftsmanship was flawless, showing that Ethan had absorbed every lesson about quality and attention to detail. It's perfect, he said. Eleanor would be proud to see you carrying on the tradition of creating jewelry to celebrate love. I wanted to ask for your blessing, Grandpa. You have all my blessings, Ethan, and I'm sure Eleanor and Melissa are blessing your happiness too. 2 years later, Ethan married in a simple yet moving ceremony. Ashley was the maid of honor. Thomas walked the groom to the altar, and Richard was the best man. The bride, Caroline, had fallen in love not just with Ethan, but with the entire family's story. During the ceremony, Caroline wore Eleanor's original necklace, which Ashley had lent her as the something borrowed from tradition. It was a way to keep Eleanor present at the most important moment of Ethan's life. In his thank you speech, Ethan mentioned how grateful he was to be part of a family, brought together by love and strengthened by the hardships they'd overcome. Today, I'm not just marrying Caroline, he said, looking at his family. I'm celebrating all the generations of love that brought us here. From Grandma Eleanor to Grandpa Thomas, from my mom Ashley to my future children, we are a chain of love that never breaks. The end of the story. So, what did you think of this touching story? Could you feel the strength of the love that spanned generations? Leave a comment sharing which part moved you the most and whether you believe true love always finds a way to prevail. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other stories that will touch your heart.